camera. Right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the introduction. I felt several slides melting away into oblivion as you went through them more eloquently than I'm about to, so thank you very much. Right. I came from Canada, University of British Columbia, about 8.5 years ago to the UHI and to one of the partners, SAMS, which is down here in Oban. And as of August last year, I took up the position of my current position is Professor of Energy for the UHI. And I'm currently based primarily through Inverness, probably for about half my time, and then the other half of the time I continue at SAMS running a research program. But in addition to that, Inverness, and the reason for having a kind of split existence is Inverness is a fantastic launch point to the other academic partners, and there's all sorts of capacity across in this building and in its new building as of May, all sorts of interesting energy-related activities going on, and I'm really excited to be engaged and being able to sort of try and join these things up together and see where we get to. I think I'm sure we've got critical mass in a whole bunch of areas, so it's an exciting appointment. What I wanted to do today was talk more about the research I've been doing over the last few years in relation to marine renewable energy, which is a very happening thing in Scotland and globally from there. Right, so this is my rather pompous title, Dolphins in Steel, Marine Mammal Ecology in Industrial Seas. And I was going to talk about how all the bits of work I've done over the last 25 years link together in terms of industrial impacts, but you'd be here till 2 in the morning, I realise, so I've kind of cut it down to focus on the renewable side of things, but with a few, I'll tip my hat to other issues as we go along. Okay, I took up post in August and was delighted to be involved in the graduation ceremonies in the autumn, where I got to hold the university mace and so on. And then I told my family I'd got this position of chair of energy, and through kind of, is it Chinese or Japanese whispers anyway, and it's kind of family whispers, it changed itself to the chair of electricity, which got some of my family, particularly abroad, slightly concerned about what position I'd actually got myself into. But no, it's the chair of energy, and it's a kind of broad chair, but I think one of the areas that we're particularly strong in across the UHI partners is understanding the relationship between energy extraction from whatever means and how that fits in with the environment. And as a community, we are in the environment for many different kinds of energy extraction. So that's kind of how I see my role going forward. And I was having a think about the different places I worked at this morning, and not this morning, but over the years. And as Clive said, I started out at Glasgow University. I wanted to work on prawns and got sidetracked by somebody in the back row there to work on marine mammals for a summer, and it kind of all went out of control at that point and ended up going around. But I've also worked on fish and so on. But one of the interesting things of working on marine mammals in different places, and maybe this says more about how hard it is to get a job in the field than a permanent job in the field in terms of the more exciting globe-trotting. But one of the issues wherever you go is how marine mammals and how their ecology fits into other activities going on in the sea. And there are many, many activities, no matter where you are in the world, associated with industrial development of whatever flavour. And there are pursuits globally trying to understand how these animals fit into whatever the local industry is. And so here's an example just up the road in the Moray Firth, a bottlenose dolphin with abundant industry activities in the distance. And I think as a field, we're only beginning to find out A, what animals do in the first place, and then B, how those activities are mitigated and changed by industrial activities. Right, so what is the sea used for? I'm going to try and keep you away because we're going along. Give me some, what are the uses of the sea? How do we as a society? Somebody said food. Yes, we take food from the sea. Shipping. Yeah. Communications, as in like cables going under the sea. Yes, use it for pleasure, recreation, stuff like that. Cultural identity. I've got some real academics here. Damn, I don't have that in my slide. Any more? Any more? MOD, yes. So we use it for a wide range of activities, of which I've got everything except cultural identity. I'll try and think up a slide. The other one, I was down in Glasgow, I was just seeing on Saturday how much plastic we send to the sea every tide going down the Clyde, for example. We use it for all kinds of things, aggregate extraction, good point here, aggregate extraction, oil and gas, pipes of whatever they're carrying, recreation, transport, fishing of different flavours, and the MOD, and so on. So we use the sea for a lot of different things, and one of the principal differences between the sea and the land, which also gets used obviously for many, many things, is that these things often spatially coincide. So instead of you have a field and you put cows in it and you put a fence around it and you use that for farming, in the sea, that place that you might use for fishing could also be used for transport, for use for oil and gas or pollution or dumping of waste or whatever else. And one of the issues really is that kicks into marine mammals is they're also using that space too, and they won't necessarily use the same. They won't use a specific box. You can draw a line around on the map, but animals might not actually use that line. So they will interact with a lot of different industries simultaneously, and I guess one of the challenges to try and understand it. Okay, so what I'm going to focus on is kind of what's consumed me for the last 8 years is the relationship between marine mammals and marine renewables. Marine renewables is an industry, a sector that's kicking off globally, but the focus, no doubt about it, for wave and tide has been the UK and in particular Scotland. But many, many of the global activities going on are focused on Scotland, with companies locating in Scotland. The first developments are in Scotland. Much of the research is associated with Scotland. Many other countries have got ambitions and are doing various things, but this is where it's at. And for me, it's a bit of a shock to go abroad. You go to America and you talk to chief officials or whatever, NOAA, whoever, and they're quoting your own statistics back to you. So it's quite interesting. Usually it's the converse. In America, everything is wonderful. So, but in this case, there's a rare exception where actually what's going on in the UK, and particularly Scotland, is the focus of things. There are other companies doing other things elsewhere, but that's clear. Right, where was this taken? I'm going to talk about marine mammals for a little while. Where was this picture taken? Oh, good on you. Good on you, I also hate you. There's, if I'd asked that 20 years ago, I'd shown that picture 20 years ago, your average person would have said, including himself, would have said somewhere in the tropics. Somewhere, well, maybe not tropical, didn't look quite tropical, but they'd have said somewhere far away. And I think this is a popular misconception that exciting marine mammals live somewhere else, usually in National Geographic land. But in actual fact, and I think it's started to bed home, I think people understand that actually around our coasts are all sorts of charismatic, exciting marine fauna. I think that's bedding in now. But as I said a few years ago, we'd expected somebody to do research on dolphins to be wearing a bikini or some sort of inappropriate health and safety equipment doing their work. But now, this is a picture from 20-something years ago that was sent to me. Okay, you still have the babes, but you might be able to do it on a boat more locally wearing appropriate health and safety equipment. And we're very lucky in the UK. We've got over 20 different species of cetaceans in our waters at various levels of abundance, from rare and vagrant all the way through to extremely common. And then also we've got at least 2 species of seals. I'll argue we have 3 species of seals, but hauling out on land we've got 2 species of seals, and so on. They vary in their abundance. So, for example, the most abundant small cetacean in coastal waters around the UK is the harbour porpoise, looking down here. And there's about 340,000, depending on the exact area you have certainly around the British Isles in the North Sea. And they vary where they are. But there may be significant decadal shifts in where they're going based on a large synoptic survey 11 years apart. But even individual animals range quite widely. So animals tagged in Denmark, we now know, might range all over the North Sea from Humberside up to Shetland and so on. So we've got wide-ranging, incredibly abundant species like the harbour porpoise, to species like the bottlenose dolphin, which... How many people in this room have seen the bottlenose dolphin? We're in Inverness, most of you. I can't tell about the people on the VC elsewhere, but thank you for raising your hands. Yeah, so most of the people here have seen it. How many have seen the harbour porpoise? Oh, yikes. Okay, right. Good on you. Bottlenose dolphins, much less abundant. There's probably 200 or maybe 250 around Scotland, maybe a couple of thousand around the British Isles, the wider British Isles, before you get offshore. And their ranges tend to be coastal and somewhat smaller, maybe down from the Firth of Forth up to Moray Firth, or from Inverness down to the Clyde, or in the Outer Hebrides case, Sound of Barrow, or the Sound of Barrow, maybe a little bit wider than that. So they tend to be more focused in where they range, but many people have seen them because they're so coastal and easy to see. Other species off our coasts, things like humpback whale, I've been seeing more and more. There was one caught in a fishing net for tail end of last year in the Sound of Mull, seen every now and again. And it's not known where those animals go. We know that they migrate somewhere or other to breed. Could be the Caribbean for the Scottish individuals, or it could be down the extinct, or maybe extinct, breeding sites down in Cape Verde or Canary, something like that. So they're quite rare, coming back after whaling. Other species like minke whale are much, much more common. You can see them in the Moray Firth, you can see them on the west coast. Where they go and breed, we don't know. Probably doing something similar. They could be going down to the tropics, somewhere like that. But it's interesting how mysterious it is. But all of those species are in their conservation is enshrined in legislation, various national and international legislation, strongly things like the Habitats Directive and so on, that provides them protection. And it particularly cuts into things like industrial activities like renewables. If you're going to do something that potentially harms animals, then it requires satisfying the regulators, national and international regulators, that you're not going to cause significant harm to those animals. Right, so a little bit introduction to marine mammals off our coast. You probably know all that because you've seen all dolphins and things. But, okay, right, marine renewables. We're also in a fantastic place for marine renewables. Scotland has about a quarter of the opportunity for offshore wind for Europe, about 10% for wave extraction, and about a quarter of Europe's opportunity for tidal stream energy extraction. And if anybody's been following the industry for the last 6-7 years, they'll know that there's been a lot of bits of the sea put up for investigation by different companies and so on, primarily driven by the Crown of Straits, kind of forthright perspectives on our future industry. But if you look at the map of Scotland, there are all sorts of sites that could be exploited, taken forward for generation. Anybody that's involved will know that this is out of date, and they know exactly which ones are in and out, and so on. It's a complicated picture. It's continuously evolving. Some are winking out of existence, and other ones are coming in, and so on. But my main point here is there are all sorts of bits of the sea that are of interest to marine renewables and have a significant opportunity to provide power for Scotland and the wider UK. Now, if I was to ask you to imagine a wind turbine, we'll all imagine something like this. A three-bladed thing on a big old white tower, usually on some sort of monopile, single pile, or maybe on a more complicated jacket or something like that. So wind turbines are relatively easy to imagine. If you imagine a tidal turbine, it's a bit harder because the industry is not as old, is not as mature, it's not been developed, it's gone through as many iterations. So the concepts for tidal power are more complex, and there's all sorts of weird and wacky ideas being proposed right now, we don't know at this point which ones will be the genuine winners of this race to be the most successful. So the ones that look like a kind of stumpy version of a wind turbine, three-bladed monopile tower anyway, and nacelle and so on. Ones with broader rotors, due to much more complicated and interesting. This is a Strathclyde University device where you have actually counter-rotating blades on the nacelle, which is a very clever invention if you want to get around torque issues and so on. Very interesting when you think about marine mammals. There are all sorts of other options with ones that are surface piercing, fully immersed, etc., etc. There's a real diversity of different devices, all being moved on in parallel with one another. I can't tell here, but it says 76. A recent count at a Scottish Renewables Forum, somebody counted up 76 different type devices being progressed simultaneously. So, interesting as an industry moving forward, very challenging for us trying to understand what the environmental interactions of these devices are. You discover something for one device, how does that translate to another one? And the other thing that's interesting is these are not small devices. They're usually in a range of about a megawatt, either just under or a bit over in terms of the power they produce or could produce. But they're also large devices if you're going to do it in terms of thinking about industry. Not as big as an offshore wind turbine, that's for sure, but they are large. You can see people, the scale. They're not only relatively large in terms of industry, you're also going to need a lot of them to generate useful quantities of power. If you're going to consider them as something like a power station, then you're going to need many megawatts of turbines, hundreds of turbines in fact. And the leading developer at the moment is a company called Maygen, who are developing up in what's called the Inner Sound, which is between kind of Scrabster and an island called Stroma up in the Moray Firth. And they are ahead of all the other companies at the moment in terms of actually building out an array of turbines, multiple turbines. And they're drilling shortly, and we'll be moving into putting turbines in the sea beginning next year. And they're looking to put hundreds of turbines there. Initial leases for 4 going out to 90-something, 96 something, and then going on to hundreds of turbines. And so that's the commercial aspiration. So as I said, at the moment, they've got a lease for 4 turbines, primarily because of the environmental constraints and uncertainties associated with that site and the animals that are around the area. But when they went through the consenting decision, UHR were quite involved in that. And there was concerns about animals, particularly harbour seals, colliding with turbine blades. And I'll talk about a little bit more about the modelling that went into this. But it looked like there may be an issue with harbour seals colliding with turbine blades. And so the Scottish Government, when providing their lease, said, OK, you can go in to developing this site, but in a staged manner. Put a few in, monitor them. If there isn't a problem, you can go on to your next group. So this is phase 1A of 4 turbines. So to go from that to that requires good environmental information on how these devices are getting on with the wildlife, particularly harbour seals. Okay, so where is renewable energy? Where is tidal stream energy in particular? Well, it tends to be in places where something to do with the topography will limit the movement of water. There'll be it's called a wave of tidal, I think tidal wave is the wrong word, but there'll be a mass of water moves around the UK. I've got oceanographers. Come on, what is the word for that? What is the word for that wave, the bulge of water that goes around the UK? Tidal wave. I always thought tidal wave was like tsunami. Anyway, okay. Yeah, exactly. Tsunami. Okay, the wave of tidal water as it goes around the UK tends to be constrained by things like headlands and between an island and the mainland, something like that. Also in entrances to open embayments, things like that. So we can all think of examples like this in terms of renewables. It might be strength of love, this might be wind and sound. This could be around Northern Ireland near Rathlin, something like that. So there are sites like this, but also these are sites of interest to marine mammals. Things like I've got harbor porpoises up here, and there's some stellar sea lions to give the idea. It's not just a UK industry. Stellar sea lions occur in the North Pacific, and there are many areas being looked at in similar ways. So these areas are important, and maybe disproportionately important, not only because of their absolute abundance, but also because these areas are where you go through to get somewhere else. So for animals moving from one place to another one, they're going to move through these constrictions. So it's really important we understand why they're at these places. Well, unfortunately, we don't know very much about marine mammals in tidal straits, for good reason, because they're really difficult places to work with. Has anybody here been to one of these tidal straits? Well, Ian Bryden obviously has, and then, okay, it's quite interesting. If you go out there on a nice calm day without much wind, it all looks very nice and calm and sensible and serene until you look at the land. You're on a boat drifting along, you look at the land, it's racing by you, like it's like being on a train or something like that. And these are really there's a huge power in these sites. And it all gets really interesting when the wind starts blowing against the tide, and then suddenly you have mountainous seas and so on. And you have turbulence and other factors going on. So for good reason, these have not typically been a place that people have gone out to study marine mammals. They're hard enough to study. The best of times, you wouldn't necessarily go to the meanest, scariest place to go and do that work. So we don't know very much about how marine mammals use these sites. But now, because of this industry, because of the need, we're starting to find out a lot more about what's going on. So what are the issues? So why are we concerned about marine mammals and tidal turbines? Open to anybody. Suggestion, please. Go ahead. Anyone? Why? Noise, yes. Collisions, yes. Displacement. Another good one. Yes. Okay, yeah. Yeah. Good. Right, I don't have that on my slide either. Right, okay. So in terms of ecology, there's issues. One is actually how you're going to build these things. What's going to happen when you put them in? And typically, one of the ways of getting a large bit of steel stuck in the ground is to pile it in. It doesn't really work in many sites for tidal turbines because it's often scoured rock. So you end up drilling holes and then piling into those holes or gluing into those holes. But pile driving is a significant issue, as we know, certainly for offshore wind in relation to the impacts make damaging noises basically for animals in the water nearby. You're going to need cabling to instrument and also take the energy away. How do you get that in? And then also, when you build these things and you actually operate, there's all sorts of maintenance boats and other operations going on back and forth, and they'll have their impacts as well. But for construction of these kinds of devices, okay, they've got some difficulties, particularly about trying to work around slack tides, but they share many of the impacts with other activities, and so there's an awful lot of work going on in pile driving, for example, right now. So they are potential issues, but not necessarily unique to wave and tide. But in terms of operation, they are different. They're different because the moving parts are underwater in relation to the flow. So one of the issues, number 4 at the moment, probably the least important, is things like chemical pollution. How are these devices going to be anti-foul? How are you going to stop things growing on them, for example? And the industry hasn't really got to thinking about this because most of it has been trying to get machinery to see that works. And then how it works in 5 years after it's gone in is kind of over the horizon for all the companies, but will be an issue shortly, I think. What are the gearboxes lubricated with? What happens if there's a spill? On the positive side, these sites are very well flushed with tides running through them. So if there's a spill of gearbox oil or even anti-fouling, it's probably not going to be a big issue simply because there's so much water flux. So, operational noises was brought up before. Yes, what noise are these devices going to make? Are they going to affect animals in their locality? But what about spatial displacement? Are animals going to be avoiding them? Is there going to be some barrier effect? Or maybe the opposite. Are animals going to be attracted to the noise? Is it going to make a super exciting noise for seeing the dolphins? And the big one is collisions. Are animals going to collide, particularly with the moving blades of the devices? That is a unique activity in the sea, and we just don't know at this point how marine mammals are going to going to respond, or if they're going to respond. Now, when I first got involved in this, I contacted some of the developers with this exact questions about what about collisions? What about you've got your tidal turbine, you've got a beautiful video of how it's going to go in the sea. What about marine mammals? Are there going to be collisions? And they say, oh, no, it's going to be fine, because they can avoid boats, don't they? We now know from lots of different angles and lots of different places that marine mammals and boats don't necessarily always get on. Animals aren't necessarily agile, knowledgeable about what's going on, and they always make the right decision. Here's a sperm whale right in front of the Moray Ferry. It went down, and the Moray Ferry went grass, and it popped up again, and it was all fine. But there are lots of instances where that isn't the case. Globally, about 1 in 5 fin whales that is found dead in the Mediterranean, taken ashore and given a post-mortem exam, turns out to have been struck by a whale, by a ship. Lots of instances of, this is probably a small boat propeller running over a right whale. There's the harbor porpoise washed up in Douglas Harbour in the Isle of Man a few years ago, just utterly bisected there. It was probably one of the ferries tying up, coming in and tying up in the harbour at the time. And there are other cases where there's large whales brought in draped over the bows of ships. Lots of instances of fast yachts hitting whales. If you follow some of the Southern Ocean races, for example, there's not infrequent reports of whale strikes, for example. So we know that these animals are not, they may be agile and they might be unafraid of boats, but we know that they don't always escape out of the way safely. So what about an issue when you have underwater turbines like this? Now, one thing that's really important to turn out, these are not propellers. They're not putting energy into the water. They're taking energy out of the water. So they're passively turning it, totally unlike a boat propeller, for example. But they are turning at speeds with a tip speed of about 12.5 meters per second, generally engineered up to about that speed. About 28 miles per hour. Blades about 12 to 22 meters in diameter. Much more akin to the kind of interaction speeds that you might expect between the bow of a ship or a bow of a fast-moving yacht and a marine mammal. And we know those strikes do occur. But what about real turbines? And the question is open at the moment. There's been an awful lot of work, primarily in Scotland, but also in North America and elsewhere, trying to understand the problem ahead of time. And there has been one operating turbine in Strangford Lough in Northern Ireland for some time, and there's been a lot of work on that, so we've learnt some lessons from that. But one of them had an Achilles heel in the sense that for consenting reasons, every time a marine mammal got in the way, they had to turn it off with a kind of big red stop button. So we haven't been able to allow these turbines to turn when we know there's marine mammals in the vicinity, which has been an issue. So while we're waiting for the industry to actually progress to a point of actually putting real turbines in the sea and monitoring them, there's been a lot of work to try and understand the problem in a more kind of academic sense. And so what I've been doing is I've been thinking about all the bits of work going on, much of it's actually in the UHI, trying to understand what this is. And I've boiled it down to 5 areas. Right, the first one is which species are at risk and how many? What is the probability of a strike actually occurring versus an animal colliding with it, missing with it, or evading with it, which is kind of dodging the blade at the last minute, or avoiding interaction with the turbine at all? Everyone, do collisions actually occur? This is a technical term, bonk. And what are the consequences of collisions? So what? If animals actually do make contact, so what? Is it a real thing or otherwise? So does the animal swim off with a good story to tell? Is it stunned with some bruises and some other non-life-threatening impact? Or is it a terminal interaction? 5th, finally, are there any mitigation options? Is there some silver bullet that we can add to this industry and solve the whole problem? Right, so I'm going to run through those 5 now. So what species are at risk and how many? And what's been going on an awful lot in recent years is companies have gone forward and gone to the regulator and been asked, what can we do about this? And they've been told, go and survey an area, find out what species are in the area and what they're doing. And so there's been a lot of survey work, not using ships and also planes to see what animals are in the area. So a lot of that's been going on informing industry and so on. Some of the work we've been going on is trying to make it cheaper and simpler to how to survey an area. And one of the things we've been working in is Carl Ray, which is an area that was being looked at by moon current turbines. And then taking out the normal survey, do a zigzag survey through the area, and either visually count or acoustically record porpoises as you go through and get a perspective of where the animals are. So this particular survey took about a fortnight, took 10 people on the boat, a team working all the hours of daylight. It was May, it snowed, it was horrible, and we worked through this area here. But one of the things we've been working on is trying to find a cheaper way of doing this. So what we did is we took the porpoise detector kind of mode. You can get recorders that do that job, put that onto a drifter, and throw it in the sea upstream of the area, and let it drift through. So with the boat, we could stop and have a cup of tea or whatever, and then go through, and it would do the recording, and we'd reach down and pick it up. And the really cool thing is you can throw lots of these in simultaneously. You can effectively do lots of surveys moving through an area all at once. And in fact, we made it cheaper than that. We sent one guy, he hired a local rig, so 3 people. They went out and they did that in a week. And this is the result we got. So we got lots and lots of drifts through the site. And at that time, the red dots are where the porpoises were detected, the black lines are where the drifters went. And we got a pretty good idea that the area that was of interest to the development, which we've got in here, it isn't a hotspot for harbour porpoises as we originally thought. And it cost us about 1/10 of what it would have cost us using the conventional method. And the interesting thing is, we got all excited about this. Stephen Benjamins, who's been working with me, really pushing this forward, working with oceanographer Andy Dale, they took it to the craziest, scariest place you can imagine, the Cory Wrekin, and you wouldn't really want to do zigzags on a boat out there, but you can throw our drifters in, got satellite telemetry, let them go off, and then they'll ping back, and you can go and pick them up 24 hours later as they head off into the outfield. And we get an idea where porpoises are in this completely bonkers site. So basically, that's a new tool to work in this kind of area. The Americans have been working too. They've come up with something called Spider, which is a significant lander that will be able to work in these kinds of sites, and so on. So there's been parallel operations. Not only where they are in 2D, but what about where they are in 3D? Because if they coincide where the turbine is in 2D, but if they don't coincide in the water column, then still no issue. So where are animals? Sea Mammal Research Unit and others have spent a lot of time investing in telemetry equipment to find out where things, seals are moving in the water column. And there's also efforts, Jonathan Gordon and his acoustics group in St Andrews University are working on an array of hydrophones. So if you're listening for calling animals, things like porpoises and dolphins, and you can basically take a boat and drift through an area with a piano wire with a series of hydrophones off it at intervals. And by the arrival times of clips, you can actually localize where the animal is in the water column, and so on. So there's different ways of actually working on whether you can catch an animal, put a tag on it, or whether you can use its own course to work out where they are in the water column. And so from that, that's been going on in a number of labs around the UK and elsewhere. We've been able to get an idea of what animals are actually using these kinds of sites and what they're up to. And from that, we're able to rule out a whole bunch of species quite quickly. However, for other species, we're not able to rule them out because we know that they use these kinds of sites, some more than others. Right, so moving on to the second area, now we've got a short list of species of concern. What is the probability of a strike actually occurring? So an animal could swim through the diameter of the blade sweep and then just swim through the air, the water in the middle and never touch a blade, or it can fly near a turbine, assuming it doesn't do anything to moderate what it's up to. Let's assume that animals just swim and ignore what's in front of them. And Bob Batty, again at UHI SAMS, has been doing a lot of work to try and understand the rate of those interactions. And he's actually used information from predator-prey type studies to moderate those kind of questions, along the lines of some of the work done for birds and wind farms, but taking a slightly different approach. and being able to actually narrow down how frequency, give us a ballpark idea of how frequently animals would go through one of these scenarios or the other one. And when you do that, very quickly you get to kind of numbers that are quite helpful, actually. So we can all argue about the details of how you come up with a number like that. But so one of our first attempts at this kind of modelling for the strategic environmental assessment, we came up with a completely fictitious development of what I thought at the time was a lot of turbines, 100 turbines up Western Scotland, which I now realise would be a fraction of one future farm. But we thought about future development, and the rate per turbine would be about 13 harbour porpoise interactions per turbine per year. So maybe that's not very many, or maybe that's a lot. If you multiply that by 100 turbines or 1,000 turbines for an industry, yes, that's an awful lot. That's becoming ecologically significant. But if you think about it the other way, in terms of monitoring, right, I'm going to measure one of these interactions, one a month, 13 a year, about one a month. That's going to be pretty hard to detect. And if you have somebody on a hilltop looking for blood or whatever they're going to be doing, that's a pretty hard thing to detect. So you can criticise encounter rate modelling. It's a go at understanding, but I think it's an extremely good idea of getting a ballpark number for us to think about how we move forward. And it's also been very good at actually ruling out some species that were on the list of concern, because simply the interaction rates will be very low. But animals have the option to do something about it. We know that they're not going to be completely naive and do nothing. They've got options to either evade a turbine blade by dodging past it at the last minute or avoiding an interaction. How are we going to get a handle on that? And I think one of the arguments is that we're going to need an industry to put a toe in the water and start moving forward before we can really understand how an individual animal behaves around a full-scale turbine. You can't really take a minnow and put it in a tank with a mini turbine and see how they get on. You need to put a real thing in the sea and see what's really happening. Now, how is an animal, if it's going to evade or avoid a turbine, how's it going to know it's there and start behaving relative to it? Here's a beautiful artist's impression of a couple of turbines turning away. Here's a nod to the biologicals, the sharks swimming along to give you an idea of scale. And this is what the artist sees, this is what the website sees, this is what the animal sees, because these waters tend to be turbid. Yeah, and you can't, at a useful distance from a turbine, remember I might have a diameter of 22 metres, and I don't know who dives out here, you might get 25 metres on a tropical holiday or something like that. How good is it out here? 5 metres would be a really, yeah, there you go, 5 metres, something like that. So you're not going to be able to see it from a useful distance. And furthermore, you're not going to be able to see it very well at night, are you? So it's probably going to be an acoustic means that animals are actually detecting turbines. So, all right, how's everybody doing? Anybody know what a turbine sounds like? You can hear a turbine. Yeah, before I start going on and on about acoustics, I thought there are very, very few recordings available anywhere of turbines. Now, I don't know how to do this because we don't have the mic into the tool. So I'm going to take this off and put it on my laptop. Okay, so this is a tidal turbine in operation. I find that people talk about this kind of thing, but then don't actually know what a turbine sounds like. Now that's a particular turbine. That's the MCT. That's the CGen device in Strangford Lough, and it's a particular turbine with it's actually got two blades either side turning, whatever, and it makes that particular noise. It'd be very different from a three-bladed horizontal axis or a vertical axis turbine, or one with a different meshing frequency in the cogs and so on. So at the moment, we have an inkling of what turbines will sound like, but we've got some way to go. I'll say a bit more about that in a minute. Now, how do you record in tidal streams? How do you record underwater for a start? Anyway, how do you get an idea of what underwater sound is? You take a hydrophone, underwater microphone, go out in your boat, park your boat, anchor it usually, put your hydrophone over the side, listen, put your headphones on, and have a good old listen. The problem is, what happens when the water is going at 3 to 4 meters per second, or like 8 knots? You can't anchor the boat for a start, your boat will be torn to pieces. How do you record what's going on? Well, the typical thing would be to go along, not necessarily with a boat, you take a mooring, I'll give you a preview. You put some weights in, a J-shaped mooring afloat, you put your acoustic recorder on that, and then that's all very good until the tide starts going, and then the whole thing gets laid flat, which is fine if you just wait a while, wait till slack tide, and then we'll pop back up to the surface. But what usually happens, it turns out, is this rope will snake around on the seabed, catch some supermarket trolley or whatever's in there, get tangled up, and then when slack tide comes, your boarding never actually comes back up to the surface. Goodbye. Even worse, what happens is you come back with a very good recording of flow noise past your microphone. You just get this, you've got nothing to do with the environment, it's just the water moving over the microphone. And there are ways to mitigate that, but all of them are very technical and mostly non-effectual. So the more standard way to do it is to go out with your boat, don't bother with the anchor, plop your hydrophone over the side, and then go with the current. And the moment you go with the current, everything becomes, the bit of water that was over there next to your boat stays over there. You all move along together through the area. So you can get recordings that way. My experience is, though, you tend to, nice calm day, you get a little bit of wind. The wind is never going with the tide. You end up with a boat kind of pulling against the tide, and you get a cable strum going on. You get and so on. More commonly, when you go on a rented boat, there'll be a crew. They'll have boots on, moving around the deck. There'll be some loose piece of something in the bilge rattling around, etc., etc. You don't get a clean recording either. So basically, what I've been working on for the last few years with the acoustics team at UHI SAMS is trying to take the best bits of this combination and get rid of the worst bits. And so what we've been doing is taking all of this bit and taking the recorder and then getting rid of the boat and develop what we call a drifting ear. So basically it's a drogue, which is a big sock in the sea with a hydrophone just down below it, a buoy keeping it at the surface, and a box with the recorders and a GPS and a flag so you can find it, and a satellite transmitter, and so on. And so throw that in the sea, same way I talked about the drifting porpoise detectors, throw that in the sea, you can get a nice clean recording of a site. And even better, you can get several of them. So we now nearly have 4 of them to put into the sea and get a recording of the site. And here's us developing, having a go in the Falls of Laura, which I have to say was quite fun, and went through version 1 and version 2 very quickly as they flooded, got relatively quickly destroyed, but we learnt and came up with a system that actually works. And we've now used that in all sorts of sites around the UK for recording underwater sound. And it's amazing. When you start listening, you can hear calling fish and all sorts of stuff. And this is all developed in concert with EMEC. Caroline Carter and myself worked on trying to get an idea, and she did this for a PhD, running drifters through the Fall of Warness site, and then from that take all the recordings that you get at particular moments, and then you can build up a sound map. And the thing we've learned about that is that the underwater sound is not a uniform thing. It's not the same everywhere you go, but it changes on very small scales. There's no turbine there. This is before they built anything. So even the noise floor on a site is quite variable and loud. These are loud sites because of all the gravel and cobbles and all the other stuff that's moving back and forth. And Denise Risch, who's in the audience, has taken on this mantle of being doing that for the next few years, I hope. So we've been doing this and trying to get an idea of turbine noise. We went and recorded the open hydro device, which turns out to be extremely quiet against background noise in the area. And what we're finding is this huge difference between some devices which are very noisy and other ones which are very quiet. The problem is that most of these devices don't exist. They exist in a spreadsheet, on a plan, and so on. They're not full scale, or they're not in their final iteration of gearbox and so on. And that's a real problem for trying to understand what the impact is when there isn't a full one to go and record. So we're working with a company called Xi Engineering, who are an Edinburgh University spin-out, and they're an engineering company that understand and look at vibration in devices. And in a conversation, we discovered that, hey, you can take your modelling and project it to the outside. So they look at all the interactions between the components and the gearbox and everything else, and then figure out how that sound will get out of a device into the sea. And they can provide acoustic maps, effectively, of the sound propagation out of a device for a device that hasn't been built yet. That's fantastic. When a company say, actually, we're going to go from an 18-metre diameter turbine to a 22-metre diameter turbine, we're going to change the gearbox a wee bit, in 5 years' time, we can have an idea of what it's going to sound like up front, which is extremely useful for answering this, for considering this question. So trying to get at, how is an animal going to avoid a turbine? What we can do is put all these bits of information together, take the noise floor in the area, how loud it is naturally, and then populate it with future turbines as they're going to be in an array, and then we can figure out what the noise profile is going to be like, and then consider that in terms of what an animal with its particular hearing range is going to pick up. So this will be an example for a harbour seal, and we discover that actually in this area, up until they get very close to turbines, they can't hear it. They won't be able to hear it in this particular example. So that gives us an idea of how animals may be able to detect turbines. That was my cue to play you a turbine, so I've done it now. We're trying to get a stage ahead of that and say, okay, we've got turbines going into the sea in a few years' time. We know what they're going to sound like. Maybe we can play the sound of what they're going to sound like ahead of time at the site and see what the animals do. And if they if they swim like crazy in the wrong direction, we know there's going to be maybe a barrier effect rather than some collision effect. If they ignore it, we know we have to pay a lot of attention to collisions. So this is what we've been doing in an American DEFRA-funded project over the last few years. A whole collaboration of people from the UK, including the SAMS team, is taking turbine noise and then playing it back through a military-grade speaker sat at the site where turbines would eventually go. So we think about porpoises and dolphins, for example. We then take a whole series of cool detectors, pepper the seabed with them, and get an idea of how they change their behaviour, if they do at all. So we've been doing that. We did something in collaboration with St Andrews University 2 summers ago on harbour seals in Moray, and then this last summer we were working on harbour porpoises off the west coast of Scotland. So we went to a site off the west coast where we knew there's lots and lots of harbour porpoises in this area, but otherwise it's very quiet in terms of industry and other activities. And we put recorders, between his Jim Elliott, putting in a series of recorders on the seabed in an array. This is our speaker boat was moored here, and then we were with a recorder on and another one's out, and then there's a control site elsewhere. And we basically ran that for several months with the speaker playing in a kind of randomized sequence, turbine on, no turbine, turbine, no turbine, to see what's going on. That information is now sitting in Stephen's computer just now, working all of that out. But that's, as I see it, a tool for trying to get ahead of the game and understand what the impact is as the industry comes along. Right, so do collisions actually occur? Well, as you probably guessed, we don't know the answer to that because we have to let the industry become a reality. And one of the issues is how we're going to measure that. And there's lots and lots of ideas floating around in the industry right now about how we might do it. People are proposing high-frequency, high-resolution sonar, optical cameras, accelerometers on blades, strain gauges, microphones on blades, and so on and so on. But the bottom line is, at this point in time, we do not have a collisionometer. We do not have a device to put on turbines that will tell us whether collisions happen or not. There's a call out, something called the catapult, and also sensors are interested in actually coming up with this technology. But at this point in time, we don't have it. Which would be very important. And one of the issues there is how big is the signal you're looking for? There's a project called XMed, which UHI are involved in, with Manchester University taking the lead on. And what they're doing is well, I should say we are doing, is making scale models as part of the project, making scale models of the whales out of ballistics, gel, and various other hard things. Got a picture here. Scale models, and then putting them into flume tanks and then bumping them off the turbines. The main project's an engineering one to see whether a whale strike would break a turbine, because it's industry critical. But also, we're interested in to know how big that signal of the bump will actually be. No project's ongoing just now. Okay, fourth. What are the consequences of a collision? So what? Who cares? If it's a non-consequence, if it doesn't injure the animal, we'll live with it. So there's work going on in a number of different places. In North America, in University of Washington, there's been work going on to see what would happen if a killer whale, this is a killer whale in an MRI scan, stuck its head in an open hydro turbine device, what it would actually damage with the clunk, hit its brain and so on. Dave Thompson at SMERS doing some work, effectively crash test seals, where he's hitting carcasses of seals that have died for other reasons with effectively turbine blades to look at what damage there would be on the inside of the animal. Would that be a sign on the carcass that you could actually understand when it comes to the pathology? So, because when Nicola Sturgeon turns the first array of turbines on, a couple of days later there will be a stranding of a marine mammal on a beach nearby, because there is every week. But the media pick up on this. They're going to say, was that turbine killed that whale? And the pathologists from Inverness, who are actually on their way back from Orkney right now, will be sent out to the scene, do a post-mortem, and then have to know whether that animal died of whatever traumatic death it had, whether that could be ascribed to a turbine or otherwise. So I think this is very helpful. And then also, what beaches are actually at risk? And again, Mike Beddington, a UHI SAMS PhD student, he's doing some work on where would a marine mammal struck by a turbine actually have a chance of stranding. He's using oceanography, both to work forwards, because people are starting to search beaches up ahead of the industry going in, but also if there is a mass stranding, could it credibly have come from one of these turbine site developments? Okay, right. So the last one, okay, there may be a problem. What can we do about it? Are there any mitigation options? Well, the first one is avoid bad places. Don't put your turbines where. Now, the bad news is all of the places people have looked for developments such as this have got marine mammals in them, unless it's in a lake somewhere. So that one's out. Another one that gets brought up over and over and over again, can you put some sort of physical barrier in front of the turbine? And the bad news is that it really takes too much energy out of the turbine, which kind of defeats the point. And also it'll get covered in kelp and weed and rubbish and all sorts of stuff. So it's not a go, though it keeps popping back up, and some people are optimistic it might be possible. Another one that hasn't been explored is can we reduce the tip speed at all? If you bring the tip speed down, the rate of interaction goes down and the amount of damage to the animal drops. And that's one that hasn't really been looked at, primarily because people are trying to get energy out of the sea, and it's engineering, make the thing work. So we don't know if that's a possibility. The other one that is going on is detect and stop. Can you put a series of sensors out in front of a turbine? If you can pick echolocation sounds, you can turn the turbine off. Or you can have a sonar operating sonar. And that's what's happened with the Strangford Lock turbine, is they have a sonar in front of it, and then somebody with a keyboard, I think it's F9, and they push the key, stop button. They push F9 and the turbine stops. So that's a way of doing it. It's not a very good way for the industry to actually move forward, because every time anything comes near the turbine, you have to turn everything off. That's not a commercially viable way. So the other one that comes up a lot is can we add acoustic warning? Can we instrument add extra sound? And my daughter came up with a great idea. Can we use killer whale sounds? Can we add killer whale sounds and keep marine mammals out of the way? And there's all sorts of complexities about adding things like that, and even how would killer whales react to that sound themselves. A good idea. Seal scales would be a more conventional sort of thing used on fish farms. But I think I'm just about to finish here. But the issue is an animal moving through an array of turbines might have a choice about what it does. And let's say we jump ahead of the game and say, well, let's mitigate this whole thing. Let's add extra sound just to get rid of the problem. If we add extra sound, what is the animal going to do? And it may well, we might step away from collisions into area avoidance and all the other consequences. So we have to be quite careful about what we choose to do. Okay, I'll summarise. Take homes. Mammal turbine collisions are a potential issue. There's a lot going on to understand the problem as the industry moves forward. Documenting actual strikes is a fundamental, but tools are under development. We don't have a collisionometer yet, and I think that's a real priority where we need to go. And I also think we shouldn't necessarily move right towards mitigation straight away. I think we ought to make sure there's an actual problem to fix before we try and fix the problem. And finally, I think generally the academic world is in good step with the progress of the industry. I mean, admittedly, the industry's been quite delayed, but I think we're in a good position as things move forward. Okay, there's many people to thank, so thank you very much, and many funders to thank. Thank you very much.
Right, I think we've got time for a few questions. What was the fascinating book? Who wants to start?
We'll see. Okay, so yeah. So just for the people that are not in this room, do we think that the industry is in a different place if the Strangford Loch turbine hadn't had to go through this strange thing of stopping every time an animal was seen or detected? I think it would be in a very different place. I think we would know an awful lot more. However, again, they don't have a collisionometer on their turbine, and I think this is really important in terms of proving the negative. I think the case has to be made that animals didn't strike that turbine blade, because Strangford Loch, okay, if an animal is swimming into the loch and gets hit by the turbine and strands inside, got a chance of finding it. If it's going the other way and it goes into the Irish Sea and is washed away, it'll never be found. And then there hasn't been a solid case made that there were no strikes, which has to occur eventually. So I think that's why I see the collisionometer issue as absolutely central to proving the negative. Absolutely.
You know, there are a number of designs that you combine. Those 4 such programs, different designs, and variety of different property lines. Too much stuff. There are some you pay for it, or that way you can something that is the original design for it. You put them into the show, you put them into the side.
I can summarise that in a sentence. Yeah, is there a role for the government to move forward and kind of take away some of the complexity of all these different companies and sites and so on? And I think it was the first thing I said in the first meeting I went to in 2005 was exactly that. Was how can we generalise this down to something useful that we can actually study? And I was basically very quickly slapped down for coming up with something that was anti-competition. And these companies are out there competing with each other. and it's an open market for whoever succeeds in all respects in terms of the environment and energy and so on. And yeah, I was idealistic perhaps, but I was very quickly slapped down. But I think a lot of things have changed, and I think certainly in terms of the wave industry, things are going in that direction at the moment, with the government taking on some of the really insoluble bottlenecks for the industry, and then taking responsibility of those so that the whole of the industry can benefit. I don't think tide is moving that, but it might move in that direction. Really. I think there's some really interesting options, and I could go on for ages in terms of all that I did go on for, all the different options. Light would be another one that would attract, and I think it's the turbine blade tip, it's the few feet at the very end that is really the issue. Everything else is moving more slowly. So it might make sense. But if you're a predator moving through the sea and you see this light thing going past you, what are you going to do? Are you going to go and swim away? I doubt it. So we don't know how animals behave, but it might well be an attractive thing. But the other one is you put anything in the sea and it gets fouled. It gets covered in slime. I should be careful what I say. It gets, what's the right word, Ryan, for what will grow on? Fouled. Within hours, and then your light will become encrusted with all sorts of things living off, photosynthesizing off the light created by the thing that's inside of the goo that it created. So doing that is pretty tricky. But in the talk I gave this afternoon, somebody suggested, what about instrumenting or equipping the turbine blades with some sort of reflectors to reflect echolocation? And that would be a very good way of doing exactly that. So, yeah, there are options for making it. And I think one thing we don't understand is how an animal will perceive a device and how it will behave around that. You know, when you think about a deer in a car, it's quite simple. Car, lights, well, they still get struck anyway. But how an animal will behave with something as big as a tidal turbine isn't clear. You want it to swim away, but you don't want it to swim only just far enough to get hit by the turbine blades. Okay, for the people on VC, how does the threat of tidal turbines compare to other issues, shipping and other things going on in the sea? Number one, bycatch. Swamps, everything else, bycatch, which is accidental capture in fishing nets. It is top of the list over and over. I think the tidal stream industry is suffering in some way because it's the last kid on the block, and we understand how vulnerable our ecosystems and species are, and therefore it's paying the price. Lots and lots of other practices that go on that haven't had to go through this level of scrutiny. I think it's a shame in some ways, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't just ignore it because it's one of the ones on the list. But there's a lot of work going on to bycatch, to understand bycatch and mitigate it as well. Ship strikes in North America, a huge amount's been spent, to the point where for ships coming in from the Atlantic into East Coast US harbours, they have spotter planes seeing right whales and then talking ships in around them, and that's a significant expenditure.
Okay, do we have any final questions? Conscious of VC land? Do you have anybody out in VC land that wants question?
Please.
It's okay, you don't have to. Okay, can I just sum up? First of all, thank Ben for what I think was a really fascinating talk. When I came into this lecture tonight, I was very open and cold. I thought you could just go to turbines, stick it in the water, and whoever's coming towards it will see it, get out of the way. So the secret of a good communicator is that it can get very complex issues over in a very simple way. I think Ben has done that. I've made good point. What he's also done is, for me, he's making point. Not only is he educating about some of this, but he's making think about some of the longer term issues, the environmental impacts on it. How things are never as simple as we first said. So to be able to get that across in a way that a layperson can understand, I think is testament to the presentation. What I'd like you to do is just put your hands together and thank them for what I think has been a superb inaugural lecture.